That's interesting. Good. I'm going to miss the community, its robustness. It's one of the few communities I know where you can truly have robust engagements. But those robust engagements are about issues that matter. This country will only be healed if we have honest engagement and if we keep social justice at the core. And frankly, Wits is about that. It's about honest engagement and it's about social justice. And we can't turn around this country without this university making the kinds of contribution that it needs to. And so I'm going to miss the robustness. I'm going to miss the camaraderie. Sometimes I've had to stare down malevolent politicians or malevolent activists who believe that they represent the fountain of all wisdom. But the general robustness, the integrity of the ordinary conversations I have with the university community. I have a lot of faith in our community, ironic. I want it to be remembered that. I want it to be remembered as this. I have a lot of faith in our university community. But I have the faith in the ordinary student, the ordinary academic, the ordinary professional and administrative staff. Not those who believe they lead the institution, not those who believe they're the activists and politicians of the future. So I think it will help me, so as in many ways resembles Wits, both in its strength and its weaknesses. Its strengths being its passion for social justice, its strength being its commitment to robust engagement. Its weakness in that it doesn't take efficiency seriously. It's not sufficiently responsive to the small things that count. How do you respond to an email? How do you show empathy? And sometimes it needs to overcome the divisions, the very deep divisions that sometimes animate the conversations. The big lesson I learned about Wits is you can have a robust conversation, you can disagree, but what we have to manage is to manage those divides so that they don't become so deep that it splits the institution. We must have robust conversations, but we must remember that at the end we one institutional family. And despite the agreements, we have a single collective agenda, which is to change our world. Robust, committed to social justice, and diverse and cosmopolitan. It's more than 3 words. I think Fees Must Fall was a socially just cause. I think it was completely legitimate for students to protest around the cost of higher education. But I think that parts of the Fees Must Fall protest reflected the challenges of many of the protests of the contemporary world. And that is, it very quickly became violent, or at least parts of it became violent. And when it became violent, it lost support. It lost speaking to the cause itself. And that then lost its support. It forced us to intervene in ways that contained it. And so it seems to me that what Fees Must Fall tells me about this world is our world is really unjust in many ways. And social mobilization is fundamental to fixing this world. But it has to be a social mobilization that isn't violent. It has to be a social mobilization that doesn't retreat into a crude nativism or an ethno-nationalism that divides the human community. It has to be a social mobilization that has social justice at its cause, but also builds the bridges of the human community. And if you forget about building those bridges, then you undermine the very cause itself. And so it seems to me that's the story about Fees Must Fall. And I don't think it's a South African struggle. Ironically, in the coming years, I think it's going to be the struggle of higher education around the world. And I think that my experience at Wits has enabled me at least to think through that struggle. So let me start on the gender-based harm challenge. I mean, I really am traumatized by how gender-based harm afflicts our society, the way we treat women and children. And frankly, this emerged, I think, in my first week on the job, where I think there was a whole series of sexual harassment cases that hit the front pages of the Sunday Times. And we dealt with it fairly quickly. I think, initially said that I will have this resolved within 3 to 4 months. And we did a couple of things. We immediately instituted an inquiry in all 4 cases. We immediately instituted, immediately after the inquiry, a disciplinary. And effectively, we continuously communicated to the university community about that. And effectively, it seemed to me that that was important. Decisive action, ongoing communication, and firm action. I think out of the 4, 3 were fired, 1 resigned. And that was resolved within 4 months. We retained the principle of, if you like, the laws of natural justice. But we were also victim-centric, and we dealt firmly with the challenge. We followed that up by establishing a gender equity office, largely at the behest of a whole series of gender activists who had been advocating it for some time, and an investigation that was initiated under the leadership of Bonnie Mayersfeld. And that gender equity office really did well. It took 2 years to establish. It had some fantastic gains, including tracking data, providing support, passing some new policies, including, if you like, banning relationships between academic staff and undergraduate students, including honor students. I think all of that was important. Is that enough? Absolutely not. In a lot of ways, the struggle against gender-based harm is going to be a never-ending struggle. It's going to be a struggle of enabling ongoing inclusion. And so, in the last 2 years, it re-emerged. Just about 2 weeks ago, Zebulon and I met a whole series of stakeholders and individuals to talk about how could we do much more than we did. Because clearly, this challenge still afflicts our society, and it still afflicts our institution. And so this is a struggle that is ongoing, and we have to do far more. And I'm gratified that Zebulon has made this one of the substantive focuses of his tenure as Vice Chancellor. I will also say that we've had to make some hard decisions around the Gender Equity Office. At times, the administrative efficiencies of that office were eroded, and we had to intervene and bring it in line and ensure that we remained responsive to the principle of natural justice, and yet simultaneously be victim-centric. And we've had to stare down some actors in that regard, and we've had to enhance the efficiencies of that office. But I think we've got it at a place where it's doing an incredible job, and I think that Zebulon can only build from here. If you ask me what's the lesson from the gender-based harm struggles, I would say decisiveness, constant communication, and achieving, you can have a compatibility between victim-centric and respecting the principles of natural justice. These are not mutually exclusive. They can be brought together. And I think that we have managed to do so through the collective struggles and engagements of the last few years. So, I mean, COVID-19 has been an incredible challenge, and I think we've done really well. I think we can learn from it. There are three principles that I think I would love to highlight. If you like, philosophies that we need to, if you like, remember if we're going to get through this pandemic and many of the challenges that come together. The first is never see social justice as a reversion to the lowest common denominator. You know, too often people say social justice means that we can't do things because some people are not empowered to do so. And our answer is not to revert to the lowest common denominator. It's to say that what we need to do is act in exactly the way that world-class responses would entail. But that, unlike many other parts of the world, we recognize that we live in a very unequal world, and we will lend a helping hand to those who are struggling. So I just want to remind you, in April, we bought 5,000 laptops and distributed it under very difficult conditions to all of the students that didn't have devices. We negotiated connectivity for all 37,000 students at no cost to the students. We brought some students who did not live in social circumstances that enabled them to learn. We prioritized them to return to the residences. All of this is lending a helping hand. It's not a reversion to the lowest common denominator. We don't use our deep inequalities as an excuse not to do the right thing. What we do is do the right thing and assist those that are not in a position to participate fully. We assist them to enable them to fully participate. And it seems to me that that's the first lesson. The second is act decisively. If there's a lesson that I was going to hand over to Zebulon, it's that, act decisively. There's always the danger of making mistakes. Be open to learning from the mistakes you make. But don't let a challenge paralyze you. Rise to the challenge. Make a decision. And if there are mistakes that are made, learn from those mistakes. And then the third, we can only get through this if we come together as a collective community. See, our response and our success in managing COVID-19 wasn't the success of Adam Habib or the success of the executive. It is the success of the university community. It's when the academics came together with the professional and administrative staff, came together with the students, that kind of pragmatically dealt with the challenges, saw the inequalities, and marked a plan to get around and transcend those challenges. When we came together as a university community, we made things happen. We can make magic happen when we come together. It's truly, if there's a lesson to be learned, it's together we're truly stronger. And that's the lesson that we need to remember. There will be challenges coming, I can guarantee you this. Given the deep financial challenges this country is in, we're going to have problems. And we're going to have to make some hard decisions and some hard trade-offs. If you let those hard trade-offs divide us, we'll let those challenges eat us alive. If we come together, make those hard trade-offs, but remain committed as a university community, if we stay down those that want to paralyze us, we can make magic happen. And the world can throw us whatever challenge it wants. We will transcend it. In the end, and I know that other universities get angry when I say this, but I have to say it. You know, this institution is credible. This university is central to the imagination of this nation. Without this institution, this nation cannot succeed. I want you to remember this. When COVID-19 happened, which was the institution that led on online? Where did the clinical trials happen? Where was the debate playing out on economic policy? Who were the people that stared down the malevolent politicians and activists who tried to paralyze us? Every one of those arenas, Wits led. It has always led. And this is why it's so important that we make this institution work. For the success of our graduates, for the success of our academics, but for the success of this nation. Because we can't build an inclusive society until Wits coheres as a university community and targets and focuses on the building of that society. You know, my most magical moment was actually sitting in the concourse and the fees was well. I mean, it's kind of an odd thing that people might say, but it reflected in a lot of ways both the pain and the promise of our society. The pain by the fact that so many of our young people had to rebel and say, we're entitled to an education, and that we shouldn't be denied our education because we're poor or because we're in an unequal society. And the promise, because we sat collectively in that concourse, and for all of the pretense and the politics of spectacle that played out, and I sat and had coffee and ate nuts on the ground. By the way, I wasn't asked, they didn't force me to sit on the ground. When people asked me, do you want a chair? I said, no, let's sit down. I've done it before, do it again. We had nuts together. And we broke, in a kind of symbolic way, we broke bread, collectively. We disagreed. If you go back to the footage of that day, in the morning, people were angry with me. In the afternoon, they sang about me. In the evening, they criticized me. And it represented both the pain and the beauty, the promise of South Africa. And what it shows you is however deep the divides, we can get through it. So for me, that was a magical moment in many, many ways. Home on a Lady was, and Home on a Lady was for two reasons, it seems to me. First, because it represents great science. It represents great knowledge. And it represents that we create great knowledge for the world, not simply for South Africa or for Wits or for the academic community. We create great knowledge for the human community. And we brought together government, stakeholders, the world's media, the academics, Lee Berger and others. And we engaged in presenting that knowledge to the world by a partnership of academics from multiple parts of the world, from the US, from Australia, from South Africa. We've often said science has no boundaries. We often said that we want to act, our research and our teaching is beyond institutional, national and continental boundaries. In Home on a Lady and that discovery, we showed that in praxis. But the second thing about Home on a Lady is it reminded me of the words of Philip Tobias, who was one of the great paleoanthropologists of its university and of our world. And what Philip Tobias always said is that the research, the paleoanthropological research, really represented the scientific foundations of a common humanity. What he said is we do great science, but in that great science, we establishing the foundation of a common humanity. And you can't build the bridges of a common humanity. You can't build bridges across the human divides until we have that foundation where we recognize we all belong to a single human family. And that's something that's worth it. So that was, I think, truly special. It's hard to, Shimologong was great and important. There were many, many other things that I found beautiful in Wits. But those two were special in a sense, because they spoke in a lot of ways to my soul. And they spoke to the institutional soul of Wits University. You know, I think people don't realize that you're very constrained, actually. People think that because you're Wits University, well, you have all of the power, you can make all of the decisions that are required. Actually, you have some power, but you don't have untrampled power. And I don't mean that because you've got to go through council, senate, or the university community. I mean that your ability to make decisions is constrained by the resources you have, by the system you operate in, by the policies that exist in the society. You know, if I had untrampled power, I would have delivered free education. But if I delivered free education, I would have bankrupted this institution and Wits would not exist. I do not have the resources to do that. So you don't have to make the case for me that I think free education would be good for both Wits and this country. But we do not have the resource base for it. And so you do what is possible within the framework of what exists. You look at the parameters and you kind of, what I've learned is coined the term radical pragmatism. Still keep the goal in mind, but you're pragmatic within the framework of the possible. You push the boundaries of what is possible. So if you ask me, I think that's really not understood. You'd be amazed at how many people write to me. I've had spouses write to me to say, you know what, we're having problems in my marriage. Can you help me sit with my people? As if I could resolve this. I've had patients write to me. I've had parents write to me about, could I negotiate with their children about how they should have relationships? It's astonishing what people have written to me about. It's amazing. I've had people approach me to see if I could avoid and resolve divorce cases between, sometimes not even Witsies, people outside. I've had students write to me from other universities saying, I'm having a problem with my university is not responding. Can you help me fix the problem at UNISA or UCT or Stellenbosch? It's astonishing, actually. And so if you ask me what's the one thing that people don't realize, is you have some power, but you do not have untrampled power. And that is, I think, how it should be. I love Bruce Springsteen. The reason I love Bruce Springsteen is because he sings about issues that are important to the world, but he also sings about love. I love the fact that Bruce Springsteen sang a song like Born in the USA, where he has a beautiful song in his 2008 album, I think it was a 2009 album, on the Great Recession. And it's about, if you like, a song about bankers. It's about people who are really living through hard times. And he's singing a song about a husband who's telling his wife that we'll get through this, that we'll make a plan, that I will go and lay some bricks and I'll fix the cars and I'll earn some cash and we'll put some food on the table. He speaks about human beings and the problems of ordinary human beings. So that's partly it, but at the same time, despite the fact that he sings about all of those, he sings about love. He sings about personal relationships. You know, Tougher Than the Rest, which is in the 1980s that he comes out with. It's really a song about a relationship between a man and a woman and how two working class people fall in love and how they go through all of these challenges. And he's saying to her that he's kind of wooing her. You know, it's kind of corny and it kind of speaks to my soul. So I love Bruce Springsteen in that sense. I used to be enthralled with Joan Baez in my younger years. I still am in many ways. Joan Baez reminded me of this kind of hip, radical singer of the 1960s, folk music. In Fees Must Fall, I must say that the song, the artist that spoke to me more than anybody else was Leonard Cohen. And he spoke to me in a sense because he came out with a song called The Anthem. And the chorus of that song, I can't recall the words, but go, ring the bells that have to ring. And then he goes on to speak about there's a crack in everything. And the chorus is about, the song is about, don't let the challenges of the world paralyze you. You'll never have a perfect offering. You'll never have a perfect solution. When gaps emerge, take those gaps. You might not have the perfect solution, but take it and use it as an opening for bigger openings. Leonard Cohen spoke to me in Fees Must Fall like no other artist did. Because what Fees Must Fall was about is student leaders and even some academics, what I tended to call the Pol Pot Brigade, had kind of zero-sum outcomes. You know, the world was black or white. It was socialist or capitalist. They didn't understand reform. They didn't understand social inclusion as a never-ending struggle. And Leonard Cohen said it far more beautifully than I could. I wanted to have his words, the chorus, in the beginning of the book Rebels in Rage. I couldn't get permission. I got permission, but it was after the book got published. I never got in. But I thought those words, that chorus of the anthem, spoke to me in a way that no other artist spoke to me in Fees Must Fall. I must say the one other thing about Fees Must Fall, it might kind of be bizarre. In the middle of Fees Must Fall, the thing I regretted is I didn't play the guitar. I had this incredible urge in the middle of the concourse to call for a guitar and start singing. I think if I had the skill to play a guitar, I think that concourse would have been even more poignant than it was. But I never had the skill sets to play a guitar, so I just couldn't rise to the challenge of a Joan Baez. So Savannah, I think that Savannah is beautiful. It's a really incredible home. What I will remember is memories of Savannah. We've got some beautiful memories here. My son got married from Savannah. I remember, them practicing in the days before the wedding. He and his wife Sabika, Irfan my son and his wife Sabika, and Zidan my other son, and lots of their friends were choreographing, learning how to dance. And they were learning English music, music that they like. They were having Hindi music because she and him, they've learned some kind of what was called Bhangra. They were playing Mafi Kazolo, Puti. They were learning all of these kinds of things, and it was truly special. It was where they had birthdays, where they we would do very, very special things. But the most beautiful part of Savannah was its garden. Every Saturday, we have a couch on the balcony. And it's a lovely couch I can sleep in. Fatima and I will inevitably on a Saturday afternoon fall asleep on a hot summer's day overlooking the garden. I'd be playing Bruce Springsteen or Leonard Cohen, and Fatima would be squealing that she's sick and tired of Leonard Cohen and Bruce Springsteen. But we'd kind of spend the afternoon there. Every single morning, I wake up and go make a cappuccino before anybody's up. And I sit on that same couch fairly early, sometimes up at 6, 7 o'clock, and listen to the birds. So Savannah is truly special, and we'll truly miss it. We've got a lovely home in London that So has arranged. Lovely by British standards, not South African standards. It's lovely, but it's small by South African standards. It's 5 minutes away from SOAS. And at least for the first year we'll live there. But Savannah was truly special. Yes, my voice has always been hoarse. When I was 5 years old, my mum was very, very worried about my voice, and she took me to a specialist, an ear, nose, and throat specialist. And he looked at my throat. They did an investigation, and he said, no. When I used to be embarrassed in school. They used to call me Granta. And so my voice has always been hoarse. I think it's become hoarser over the years. And over the last 2 years, my voice started becoming strained. And I went to, there were colleagues in Wits who helped me with training my voice. And I went again to an ENT who wanted to put Botox in my vocal cords. And I was just too terrified of doing so. So my voice has always been hoarse, if you like, kind of odd way. Both my brothers are deaf. And I explain it by the fact that I horrendously never learned as a child to do sign language. But we kind of learned to talk to each other in our own kind of way. So horrendously, they get very annoyed with me. I, even today, can shout just scream at a pitch that both my brothers can hear. I pitch it at a particular sound that wherever they are, they would hear me. And so, I've kind of had to speak loudly to them or scream at them, which is kind of crazy if they were not in the room, etc. And so that might have contributed to the hoarseness of my voice, but that's a guess, to be honest. I suspect, but it's always been with who I am. I kind of love two types of. Firstly, I'll miss braais. Everybody will tell you that when we had social functions at Savannah, inevitably it turned to being a braai. And I know people say that it's barbecue. You have barbecues all over the world. You don't have barbecue is different from a braai. And for me, I'm going to miss the braai. I'm going to miss a boerewors. I'm going to miss a chili boerewors that you only get in South Africa, to be honest. I love samp and beans. I'm going to truly miss samp and beans. I'm going to miss, I don't know if people, in Johannesburg people don't know this, but putu. I love putu, which is a kind of maize dish in KwaZulu-Natal. It's not pap. It's a drier kind of food. I love putu. I've always loved it. I love curry. And frankly, people tell me, well, you'll get curry in London. Really? I love South African curry. And South African curry is different from Indian curry from the subcontinent. Because South African curry is a mixture between Indian cuisine and African cuisine brought together. And I think we just don't realize that. That's why you have samp and beans. That's why you have trotters. That's why you have these kinds of combinations. So I'll miss all of that. I really love South African food and would miss that. I don't think I'm going to get that so easily in London. I love Malva pudding. I'm always worried every time I have Malva pudding, I go running for 5, 6, 7 Ks to try and work it off. But I love Malva pudding with ice cream, not with custard. I love the contrast. So I truly love South African food and will miss it incredibly.
What's your favorite curry?
What's
your favorite curry?
My favorite curry, actually, so if you ask me what was my favorite normal curry, it's chicken curry. What is my truly favorite curry, actually, is springbuck tikka masala. Now that you can only get in South Africa. Who makes springbok tikka masala? But you can get that in South Africa, or you can make that in South Africa. And I don't think you can get that anywhere else in the world. Yes, well, I have heard about it. Tell me again. My view is that Dasi is part of the Wits University community. It's who we are. It's like always popped up at odd times. At various times, more of them emerge, and other times less of them emerge. And I think it should be part of who we are. We got to live with it. We might grumble with it. We might want to get rid of it, but it is who we are, and they should be allowed to roam within constraints, but they should be allowed to roam. I would hate it if the Dasi popped up in the classroom and everybody had to scream and run out. But I would be very happy if the Dasi were to be allowed to roam free. I will miss Wits a hell of a lot. Wits is special. I've always said it was a passion. It was a political passion, leading this institution. It was a passion in the sense that I made incredible memories at Wits, with students, with staff, with academic staff, with professional staff. I'll miss the good times and the bad. I'll miss the robust fights. I'll miss the kind of craziness that I would have where people would have the cheek to write to me at 2 o'clock in the morning and think and be obstreperous. And while it would annoy me, the rudeness and the obstreperousness. But I love the fact that people felt empowered enough to be able to do that. I'd stare them down because they mustn't be allowed to get away with it. But I loved this community. I loved the place that it became, the community it represents, the belief in this community that we can change the world. That spirit of feeling empowered enough to be able to change the world. But you're having the social empathy to put social justice at the core of your agenda. And for me, it's that community that reflects the most beautiful parts of what it means to be South African. And this is why I say this: don't let the malevolent politicians silence you. I think 96% of our students are beautiful. I think 96% of our staff, professional, academic, white, black, they're beautiful human beings. They must never be silenced. Don't let anybody silence you because they think they've learned to read Marx or Pol Pot or Lenin or, I don't know, Mein Kampf or whatever nonsensical document they think they've read. Speak, be heard, keep the agency of the Wits community must always be protected. And it must never be given up to anybody, including the Vice Chancellor or me or anybody else. The community in its collective is beautiful. And I have so many beautiful memories from this community. And I think it's special. All right.